Ms. Colmy?
Good morning, Your Honors.
Good morning.
Morning.
May it please the Court, my name is Christine Vargas Colmy of Nixon Peabody, counsel for the plaintiff and appellant in this case, an organization that's New Habitat, Inc. It's an organization seeking an exemption from property taxation as a charitable institution under Chapter 59, Section 5.
Before you begin, I have a procedural question. I've looked up past cases that have challenged issues similar to yours in all the cases that you cite in your brief, and they've all come up through the Appellate Tax Board. I wonder how you went to the Superior Court in this case.
The Superior Court, Your Honor, has concurrent jurisdiction with the Appellate Tax Board when what's being challenged is the tax itself, not the valuation.
And what statute? Under what statute, please?
That would be under Chapter. It's escaping me, but I'll give
Not
it to you.
the Chapter 39, Section 5. Is that? Yeah.
Well, it's in your brief, right?
It isn't. It is. He didn't see it. Yeah, why don't you do it later? I don't want you to take your time
Okay.
up with that. Thank you. But maybe you could send us a
It's Chapter 60, but I'm not entirely
You
sure.
could send us a 16L letter saying the statute that citing the statute that authorizes this type of bringing the procedure in the Superior Court.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, because the context of the organization is crucial in determining whether it qualifies for an exemption from taxation, I'd like to start today by talking a little bit about New Habitat and what it does, and then move on to discuss the statute that governs charitable exemptions and the tests that are applied and the Superior Court's decision below. New Habitat is a nonprofit, federal tax-exempt organization that provides specialized living quarters and critical services for survivors of acquired brain injury.
I don't think there's any question that the purposes of the organization, are charitable. Obviously, it's got charitable status. But isn't the real issue here not the nature of its work, but whether or not who the people are who have access to it? I mean, both in terms of number and in terms of economic qualifications?
Yes, Your Honor, those are certainly issues here. The tax collector in Cambridge has claimed that by virtue of the number of people that New Habitat is able to serve, it doesn't qualify as a charitable organization, which does not comport with the statute or the case law interpreting that statute.
Well, certainly it's a relevant factor, though.
Pardon?
It's certainly a relevant factor in the overall determination.
Well, the cases, specifically, I'm thinking of Garland, state that the charging of fees, and the New England Legal Foundation case states that the number of people served will not defeat the exemption. So while in some sense relevant, there are other factors to be considered.
Well, in the record, it indicates that both of the current residents are Medicaid eligible. Is Medicaid paying any part of this, or is it coming? There's another indication that this is coming from settlements out of lawsuits that to recover damages for the
injuries that they
Right.
suffered. Yes, Your Honor. Medicaid is not paying for New Habitat at all. This home is completely unsubsidized. It's all private pay.
This $150,000 payment fee initially, that's been done away with?
That's been done away
And
with,
there's no
yes.
admission fee or whatever you want to call
There
it
is
now?
no admission fee whatsoever now. At the time that the summary judgment pleadings were filed, there were just 2 residents, and both of those residents had paid the entrance fee. Now, the entrance fee, by the way, was instituted as a way to fund some of the capital expenses that were associated with starting the home. While the home was ideal in many respects, it still needed certain
When
things.
the case was decided in the trial court, the $150,000 fee was in effect?
No, it was
It
not.
had been done away with
It had
by
been done
then.
away with.
Okay.
Well, I wondered about that fee because I didn't see that you discussed it in your brief for the years '04 and '05. Are you claiming exemptions for those years?
Yes, Your Honor.
So how would the fact that there were entrance fees for those years affect your claim for tax exempt status for those years? Because I don't think that you discussed that in
It
your
shouldn't
brief.
affect it at all, Your Honor, because the charging of fees, whether the monthly fees or the entrance fees,
No, but then the fees for those years at least, when you did charge entrance fees, did you also charge the monthly fees?
Yes, Your
So
Honor.
then the fees for those years would have been $150,000, which was the entrance fee, plus the 200-odd thousand
About
a year.
300
So
something.
those years, the fees would have been over 300,000.
right, except for the
Not
fact
over
that the
200,000.
entrance fees are fully refundable if a resident leaves the home, and one resident did leave the home and was refunded that
But
entrance
still,
fee.
you would have to put up the money. Someone would have to have over 300,000 for the year '04 or '05 to have been eligible for those
Back when the
years.
home opened, yes, that was the case, and again, those...
Yeah, but those are two of the years for which you're claiming exemptions, but you
Yes, Your
didn't
Honor.
really discuss that in your brief.
Yes, Your Honor, that's
Okay.
correct.
Does the fact, are there still two residents?
There are two residents right now. There was a third resident who was there on a transitional basis. He was an individual who had suffered a brain aneurysm and was saved by a special surgery, but still needed the services of a place like New Habitat to make this transition from the recovery center where he was to independent living. So there, at maximum, there have been 3 individuals living at the home.
And have anybody, since the entrance fee got dropped, has anybody applied?
Yes, this particular individual.
Oh, the one who was there and has left.
Exactly.
Do you think it matters at all that one of those two residents is the son of the founders?
It shouldn't, no, Your Honor. No, I don't think it should matter at all. The individuals, Loretta and George Slover, who there were 2 of the founders, were presented with this situation where their son was injured while in a psychiatric hospital, and they were able to see what services were out there to take care of someone like that. They're incredibly well-versed on the needs of survivors of acquired brain injuries, and they saw a real need for homes like New Habitat, and took upon themselves to find other people like them to found this home.
You said that Medicaid is not paying for any of the services, but is New Habitat an eligible provider? Is it qualified to receive Medicaid payments for services rendered?
Yes, it is.
So
but it doesn't at all. And now,
Does it not, because the patients who are there are not themselves eligible for Medicaid?
the patients who are there are eligible for Medicaid.
Who's
and in
paying
fact,
Who's paying the monthly fees?
They are paying the monthly fees out of
And-
out of special needs trusts.
And they are Medicaid eligible?
They're Medicaid eligible because of the structure of a special needs trust. The way that these are set up, you would be both eligible for Medicaid medically and financially, and they are, because these funds that are in special needs trusts are not considered in determining whether they're financially eligible.
Is it that Medicaid wouldn't pay for this home?
Medicaid would probably not pay the fees for this home. That's correct. Yes.
I didn't understand. I thought didn't you answer to Justice Spina's question? You said it is a qualified receiver,
I think that if the fees were lower, it would.
but it's not now a qualified receiver.
Yes, I suppose that's correct, Your Honor. Yes.
So if a poor person had applied for admission to New Habitat and was eligible to receive Medicaid benefits, would Medicaid pay for the monthly fees at New Habitat?
Not the fees that it currently charges. So while New
But
Habitat has
a lower
stated
fee, they'd pay a lower fee.
they would pay a lower fee, right?
Are you sure? I mean, are you sure that Medicaid would do that?
If the fees were, yeah, because Medicaid has a cap on what it's going to pay for these types of services. So if New Habitat started charging less for the services that it provides, although that's not really possible for a home like New Habitat, given
It
where it's
certainly
located.
isn't. I
given
don't
where
think
it's
it is. I mean, I
located.
think that's a hypothetical that is unlikely to be played out in reality.
That's, yes.
I mean, it's not
I
clear to
concede
me.
that, Your Honor.
I mean, there's nothing in the record that says that Medicaid would pay for these services if they were billed at a lower rate, correct?
Right, I
I
don't.
mean, essentially, for whatever reasons, and they may, and I'm sure they're very good reasons, there's a special needs trust set up that makes these two patients eligible for Medicaid. I assume if they get injured and they have to go to hospital, Medicaid rather than
Right.
some other private pay or Medicare, I don't know what their ages are, picks up the cost. But I think in answer to Justice Spina's question, if somebody doesn't have a special needs trust and is qualified for Medicaid because they have no assets, you know, or the assets are so small to qualify for Medicaid or Mass Health, I take it they would not be eligible to be admitted to New Habitat.
Yes, Your Honor, that's correct.
Now,
I mean, it's not as if there are 100 beds of which 30 the institution can
Right.
absorb very, very small payments. I mean, if you've got two patients or maybe 3 or 4 at most, I think is
Yes,
max.
the maximum is 4.
So if you take away essentially one paying bed, it really puts the institution in jeopardy.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Now, we spent a lot of time talking about the internal workings of this corporation. What in the law do you rely on to say you should get this exemption?
Well, the statute that sets forth the criteria for qualification for the exemption, New Habitat falls squarely within that statute. Because it's a charitable organization, it's incorporated in the Commonwealth. Its principal charitable purpose is carried out in the Commonwealth. The real estate which it owns and occupies is used for the purposes of the organization, and the purpose of the organization can be taken from the bylaws, and I can, the articles of incorporation, I can read to you the purpose.
I think the question, the law surely is that the fact that one is a charitable organization, and there's no question, as I understand it in this case, that this is a valid charitable, nobody's challenging the charitable status of this organization for charitable purposes, but isn't the law fairly settled that the fact that one is a charitable entity doesn't necessarily entitle the entity to the tax exemption that you're seeking here?
That's correct. It's the part of the test is what it in fact does, and when you look at what New Habitat does, it falls within traditional charitable purposes. If we look at
Doesn't it have to serve a kind of a wide population? Isn't that used in some of our cases, and here it really doesn't do that?
Well, I
does
believe
that
the
fit in?
standard is it doesn't have to serve a certain number of people, but the population of people that it serves has to be large and fluid and drawn from all walks of life. And we submit, Your Honor, that because anyone can be afflicted with an acquired brain injury, the population that New Habitat serves is indeed a potentially very, very large class. Any
So
one of us.
even if it only served 4 people a year, you'd say it would be entitled to the exemption?
Yes, Your Honor.
Isn't it the drawn from all walks of life which is the challenge here? It is clear that the fact that people of means, financial means, have access to services doesn't necessarily mean that you are disqualified, but here you have a peculiar set of circumstances. Very few people, very high costs, which would essentially act as a total barrier to many, many people who would suffer from this. I mean, that's the challenge here, isn't it?
Right. But there is case law, specifically the Garland case, that says that the charging of fees, even the charging of substantial fees, doesn't defeat the exemption.
That's correct.
And
How
one
would
has
you
to
distinguish
consider-
this from Western Massachusetts Life Care?
Well, the home in Western Mass, Reed's Landing, was marketed by the organization as a luxury residential complex. Those individuals could, and in fact were required, to be able to live independently in order to live in many of the units that were available at this particular home. The folks at New Habitat are absolutely unable to live independently. Also, in Western Mass, that was part of the reason that the court found that that organization didn't relieve a government burden, and that's because these individuals could live on their own, not so.
Well, how does this relieve a government burden? Because the chances are that people who could pay this type of fee could also pay for housing.
They could pay for housing in a place that's perhaps not as adequate for them as New Habitat, which is a very, very specialized type of community for people who suffer these traumatic injuries. And also, because they qualify for Medicaid both financially and medically, if they weren't at a place like New Habitat paying for this out of their own special needs trust, they could potentially be at another home. One of the SHIP homes, the statewide head injury program homes, and those homes are, they have waiting lists. They have individuals who don't have these special needs trusts who are occupying beds or waiting to occupy beds in those homes. So we submit that if the folks at New Habitat weren't at New Habitat, they could be adding this burden on places, on other homes.
Thank you, Ms. Vargas-Cormy.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Ms. Lashway?
Good morning. May it please the Court. My name is Elizabeth Lashway, and I represent the City of Cambridge Tax Collector. And first, Justice Cowan, I would like to answer your question. The plaintiffs sought jurisdiction under Chapter 60, Section 98.
Thank you.
New Habitat has failed to meet its grave burden of showing that it's entitled to a charitable tax exemption under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5, Paragraph 3rd. Nothing presented by New Habitat contained in the record of this matter supports this court deviating from the well-established law set forth in Western Massachusetts Life Care Corporation versus the Board of Assessors of Springfield, which boards of assessors and courts across the Commonwealth have since relied upon.
But don't you think, though, there is a distinction between, just as Ms. Vargas just said, between an enterprise that is luxury residence for people who don't need any particular care and an institution that is caring for people who clearly need an incredible amount of care?
Well, in the Western Mass case, about half the residents were independently living. The other half required some assistance. In that case, there were 117 independent living units, 54 assisted living units, and a 40-bed skilled nursing facility. So roughly half required some assistance with care.
But not this level of assistance. I mean, maybe the 40 beds in the skilled nursing facility, but if you are familiar with assisted living facilities, they're nothing like what we're talking about here. These are people who can't function in anything resembling, I assume, anything other than a skilled nursing home, except that this is a form of independent living.
These are people that do require assistance with activities of daily living. For instance, the son of one of the two residents stated on his application for residence that he needs help with doing his laundry and preparing meals, and with other activities of daily living. I understand that he's not. It's not advisable for him to leave the premises without a guardian. But these are people that are able to function on some level on
Ms.
their own.
Lashway, let me ask a question slightly differently. You don't question the charitable status or the charitable purpose here, correct?
Under Chapter 180,
Yes.
yes.
I mean,
no.
so there's no question about that. So what is it, in your judgment, that brings them outside the scope of 59, Section 5?
They're outside of the scope of Section 59, Section 5 because of the court's reasoning and decision in the Western Mass case, which was that selection requirements, financial or otherwise, that limit the class of beneficiaries will defeat the claim for exemption. In here, New Habitat is charging well, let me back up and just say that there are 3 fiscal years in question here, fiscal year 04, 05, and 06. There are no other fiscal years, just those 3 years. And 2 of the 3 fiscal years, New Habitat was charging this entrance fee of $150,000. New Habitat has also charged, in addition to that entrance fee, monthly fees for all 3 fiscal years and continuing to date. And the monthly fees have ranged between $15,000 approximately to more than $20,000 a month per resident. And at the time of discovering this matter, the monthly fees ranged between $17,000 and $18,000, which equates to roughly over $200,000 a year in monthly fees. And that fits squarely within the reasoning and decision in Western Massachusetts, where this court determined that the selection requirements, the financial requirements, expressly limited the class
Well,
beneficiaries.
let's assume for a moment that that's actually the cost of providing these services. We're not talking about profits being made. We're talking about the cost of providing these 24/7 services. Does that make a difference?
It doesn't make a difference, Your Honor.
What if
not?
Medicaid was prepared to pay this? Would that make a difference?
Well, Medicaid,
What if it were?
Yeah.
well, I'll just say that it's New Habitat's grave burden of showing that it falls within the,
No,
the
no, I
exemption,
understand that.
and they haven't presented evidence
Yeah,
that
don't
Medicaid
jump
would
to the
be.
conclusion, because the issue here is, one of them is relieving the state of the burden. It may well be, and I suspect it is, that to place people in the kind of facility that would cost the state somewhere close to $200,000 per person per year. I think that's pretty well established if you take a look at what the per cost, assuming that they require institutional care, and I take it that they do. So to what extent, I mean, you have a small population of people. This maybe it'll grow, maybe not, but there's no suggestion that that's not the real cost. And if they need 24-hour, if there's 24-hour on-site supervision, correct?
Yes.
I
There's
think
24 hours.
I think it's pretty clear that that would cost somewhere in that vicinity.
But the fact is that these costs are limiting the class of potential beneficiaries of people with acquired brain injury and or psychiatric disorder.
Well, where are those people being treated right now who don't have the means to go to New Habitat?
New Habitat has presented information suggesting that there are homes that accommodate people with acquired brain injury.
And are there waiting lists for those?
I understand that there are, but there are also private pay homes in addition to New Habitat. The clerk of New Habitat, Loretta Slover, testified at her deposition that she could think of 3 off the top of her head, other private pay homes similar to New Habitat.
And do they charge approximately the same monthly fees?
She testified from her personal experience and personal knowledge that she understood that the fees for those homes ranged between $150,000 to $300,000. Those
In other
private
words,
pay homes.
these are not, they sound like a lot of money, but they in fact are not a great deal of money. In fact, I mean, for round-the-clock care, this is not a huge amount of money.
But for the average person who has an acquired brain injury, to come up with these fees is quite a burden.
That is correct, but if the government is relieved in some way, maybe there are beds available where the state is in fact providing the funds and the fees.
But as this court determined in Western Massachusetts Life Care Corporation, this is not a class of people that would rely on government housing were it not for New Habitat. There are other private pay alternatives.
But it would cost, I mean, it would cost the state something, correct?
To live in the private pay? And
Take care of these people.
if New Habitat's 2 residents did not have the opportunity to live in New Habitat, if New Habitat didn't exist, then they would have other options. They could turn to state-subsidized housing, but there are also private pay options which they could turn to. And as this court determined in Western Mass, this is a population, given the fact that they have income and assets that allow them to spend more than $200,000 a year on these types of services. This is
Do the other private pay options, or do any of the other private pay options have the charitable exemption under 59 Section 5?
I don't know that, Your Honor.
But a lot of them must end up on Medicaid in hospitals, nursing homes, right? I mean, suppose I have or you have, or anybody has a 25-year-old son and he hits a tree, has an accident, there's no liability against anybody else, and he's terrible brain injury. He's an adult, so Medicaid would have to pick him up. Where would he go? He'd go to a nursing home, right? or we have a hospital in Westfield that has them, and comas, everything else, and the state would pay, would it not?
Yes, there are homes that would, state-subsidized homes that would take
We got one right in my
individuals.
town. I also know Reed's Landing, and Reed's Landing is really a luxury assisted living place, and if we granted tax exemptions for them, all the other over 55 assisted living facilities, of which we have many up and down the state, would get the same consideration, and the people going in there are not poor by any means. They have to pay huge fees to get in, and it's rebated when they, leave and all that kind of stuff. But operationally, it's very different.
Are you suggesting that any charitable organization that pays fees, that there's a not insignificant amount of the public that couldn't, that charges fees that a not insignificant amount of the public couldn't pay, would not qualify, just by that reason alone, could not qualify for property tax exemption?
Well, this court has determined that it is permissible for a charitable organization to charge fees, and in Western Mass, this
But
court...
that's not Justice Botsford's question. Justice Botsford's question was, if there's evidence that a charitable corporation effectively excludes a large number of people because they cannot afford to pay the fees, take your average college, not the one in Cambridge, your average college. And
it's $50,000.
It's $50,000 and has minimal financial aid, if any. Does it lose its tax exemption status because a significant portion of the population, cannot afford, even if admitted, qualified, brain injured, educated, cannot afford to go?
Well, the test is expressly limiting its services to the financially well-off, and we assert
It's not
that...
expressly limiting. And there's nothing in New Habitat that says we won't consider you.
New Habitat...
It says, here you are, this is what it's going to cost you to come.
New Habitat...
I don't understand the analogy to educational institutions, because don't they limit their class of people who come anyway by, say, scores above a certain amount? If you apply to any college and you have a 200 on your SAT, they're probably not going to consider you.
You can have straight 800s and be fully qualified to go to ABC College and not be able to go because you cannot afford.
No, that's right, but I'm saying they have other limiting factors too, so I'm not sure that I understand. They limit the class not only by financial standards, but also by educational standards. So I don't understand.
Well, this class is limited too, obviously, by their medical needs.
Right.
But
I can't speak to educational institutions in that hypothetical, but I can point you to the fact that New Habitat's application for exemption provides that one of the requirements is that an applicant be in an acceptable state of health as evidenced by a physical examination, and the other one is that he or she provides sufficient information to the board of directors that they have the assets to pay these fees. And the contract between New Habitat and its residents...
That's a standard requirement for admission to colleges. Standard.
Well...
And in fact, you have long negotiations with the financial aid office.
New Habitat's contract provides that New Habitat will attempt to assist a resident if he or she becomes unable to pay, but New Habitat's clerk testified at our deposition that New Habitat does not have the funds sufficient to assist a resident if he or she becomes unable to pay. And the contract also specifically states that if a resident breaches any portion of the contract, the facility has the option to terminate the contract with the resident. And
what's the relevance of that?
I'm sorry?
What's the relevance of that?
The relevance of that is that if a resident, although New Habitat would like to be able to provide the opportunity to assist a resident if he or she becomes unable to pay, They testified that they don't have the ability to do that.
I think I really commend that you go look at the financial aid page of just about any college. It's going to say, we'll take you in, but if it turns out that you can't do it, you'll have to leave. I mean, it's not an attempt to catch you. It's what's the ramifications for what you're asking us to do to other institutions that are clearly tax exempt. And one of the issues in Western Massachusetts was that there was so much of what was going on that appeared not to be charitable in purpose.
But aren't you saying that poor people would not be able to take advantage of new habitat?
Yes, that's
And it flows from that, if poor people couldn't take advantage of new habitat, that it should not be entitled to the exemption.
not only could poor people not afford to live at new habitat, but a large portion of our society would not be able to live at new habitat. This is an express requirement of new habitat that you pay for these two of the 3 fiscal years, entrance fees of $150,000, and for all 3 fiscal years, monthly fees that total more than $200,000 a year.
But it doesn't seem to be a purposeful means of excluding people. It's almost a fact of its existence. If it's a 501c3 corporation, and I suppose that if somebody had left a huge endowment to new habitat, such that its prices came down, its fees came down, it might be able to take in a Medicaid-supported patient.
That's a possibility, but those aren't the facts before us. And if I could just briefly conclude.
There's no necessity.
Okay.
Thank you
Great.
very
Thank you
much,
very
Ms. Lashway.